Hello everybody and welcome back. Good to talk to all of you again today. And today we have some really interesting news coming out. There's going to be playable submarines in the next Halloween event. What does this mean? Why is this significant? Well, generally speaking, when they do things in the Halloween event, a lot of times they are testing new concepts and things like that they're potentially going to bring into the actual game, which tells me that this is kind of one of those play testing things. They are going to test these submarines, see how people react to them, and then potentially come, let's say 2019 or something like that, they might be bringing in submarines. So here's what we know so far, and then I'm going to talk about some of the really serious concerns that I have. So far, what they're planning for submarines is that these ships are going to be a stealthy kind of stalking type gameplay ship. They're going to, quote unquote, take some skill to play to get set up in the right positions, and then you're going to attack with your torpedoes. The gameplay of submarines is also going to have this additional vertical element to it. As you can tell in this one, there is a vertical bar for depth and things like that. Additionally, taking a look at that vertical depth bar, you'll notice that there is also an air gauge. That air gauge, it seems to last, well, at least on this submarine, seems to last about maybe a minute and 20 seconds or so. And so when you run out of air, you do have to come back up. So at least that's the first thing we noticed. There also seems to be three gameplay depths. There is surfaced, there is going to be periscope depth, and then there is actually submerged. And these different depths offer different advantages in terms of concealment, in terms of speed, things like that. Of course, some of these things apparently haven't been put in yet. In terms of your weaponry, obviously torpedoes, you have forward and aft torpedoes. They're loaded individually, you fire them off individually, things like that. These torpedoes can be fired on the surface, can be fired at periscope depth, and can be fired when you're also submerged. Although they have different penalties. Apparently they're going to implement some kind of torpedo dispersion. If you fire it when you're further underwater, yeah, you're going to have more dispersion. Even on the surface though, submarines tend to look like they're going to be really stealthy. Just this submarine, it was 5.1 kilometers from that surface ship, not spotted. At periscope depth, you're going to be even more stealthy. There was a scene earlier when the submarine was at periscope depth. They were within like 4.1 kilometers of enemy ship, not really spotted either. They have mentioned that the primary means of detecting a submarine will be things like hydroacoustic search, and from what I've seen from this early gameplay, proximity spotting works as well. Okay, let's see. Other things that I've noticed, there is going to be a clip coming up where you will see the submarine being attacked by depth charges. And from what they've talked about when it comes to depth charges is going to be you sort of, I guess, fired into a general area where a submarine can be, the depth charge sinks, and then they explode at random depths. And the point of the submarine when it comes to depth charges is dodging them, kind of like the way surface ships dodge torpedoes, but submarines dodge depth charges. Seems to be what they're going with. Submarine torpedoes, in terms of the damage output, doesn't seem to be all that bad. Now, of course, we are talking about a situation where this submarine was hitting a tier 2 Zikasa, so the torpedo damage reduction wasn't going to be huge. Other than that, in terms of the HP pools and things like that, you'll notice that the submarine HP pool is quite low. In this case, a tier 7 submarine had like 6,000 HP, although another tier 7 is different. This one's at like 10,000 something, but HP pool overall is going to be the lowest of any ship in the game. And finally, we come to the weapons to counter submarines when they're underwater, depth charges, and you'll notice that there goes the depth charge. It exploded. The submarine took a little bit of damage because this depth charge exploded close by, but some of them explode like way further down and like completely no threat to the submarine there. And they did mention that it was some sort of RNG thing, but maybe that's something that they're going to address and make it less RNG, because we really don't need much more of that. Okay, so now that we've seen the gameplay, and yes, the gameplay in the background will repeat once again, so keep your eye out for other details that I might have missed. But we do have to talk about concerns, because there's definitely concerns with regards to submarines. And the first thing really is, who are the primary ships that are going to be countering submarines? That's right, destroyers. And that becomes the first major worry for me, because take a look at destroyers today, and destroyers already have a bajillion things that they gotta do, right? Destroyers are supposed to scout for the team, they're supposed to spot torpedoes, they're supposed to counter caps, they're supposed to deal with enemy destroyers. Destroyers have a ton of things that they gotta do. And then all of a sudden, with the introduction of submarines, let's say far in the future, that's another thing destroyers have to do. And let's be honest, even today, with the disparity of skill in terms of destroyer players, it's already an issue, right? If your team's destroyers go out and they die first and they don't do their job, the rest of your team is going to really struggle, right? Especially if the enemy team destroyers even have half a brain, you're going to struggle. So now there's another thing that these destroyer players have to do. It feels like it's too much. That's the first concern. Second, so destroyers are supposed to counter subs. What are their tools? Well, their tools are going to be hydroacoustic search and depth charges. Okay, now think about this carefully. How many destroyers in game right now have hydroacoustic search? Well, if the situation becomes destroyers are meant to counter submarines, so does every destroyer get a hydroacoustic search? And if all destroyers get hydroacoustic search, then what about the lines that were specifically designed for hydroacoustic search today, like the German destroyers? Are they going to get something new? That becomes a question. Furthermore, what about the destroyers that aren't meant for this role? So I'm thinking ships like the Khabarovsk. Not meant for anti-submarine, right? That's a gunboat. It's not even meant to be really close. It's supposed to harass people from the flanks. Well, imagine you get a battle and your team gets 2 Khabarovsks and the enemy team gets the 2 destroyers that actually can hunt submarines. And like, what's going to happen there? Your team is basically going to be left without a submarine screen at all, while your 2 Khabarovsks run off just gunning stuff down. How is that going to affect gameplay? Furthermore, we already have an issue today where teams are too passive. Too many ships run off to the border, too many ships don't get into the action zone, mostly talking like battleships and stuff like that. How does having a submarine help alleviate that issue? All I see, or all I potentially see, is the introduction of submarines, and with their air limits and things like that, submarines are most likely going to head towards areas that they can have some sort of cover, they can pop up, recharge their air. So all the areas with a lot of islands and things like that, submarines are going to be there. That's going to be their killing grounds. So the only ships that are going to go in there to try to fight the submarines is going to be the destroyers. And if your destroyers fail, then every other ship is going to be like, nope, I'm not going to go in there no matter how much you tell me to, because it's not even the presence of a submarine, it's the potential presence of a submarine that's going to scare people away from certain areas. And that's going to make the passive problem even worse. Moving on. Other things that are going to be concerning. Divisions. If you have a division of 3 submarines, how much potential havoc can those ships cause? Because a group of 3, if they can coordinate properly, will be really, really hard even for a solitary destroyer or 2 to deal with. But I mean, that is random battles. A lot of times in random battles, a lot of destroyer players are solo players. So, judging by the amount of damage that these torpedoes can do, they really could potentially one-shot destroyers. So that makes destroyer lives even more difficult, even more challenging. And you think about destroyers today, right? All the problems that they already encounter. So, yeah, there's definitely some challenges there for them. A few other sort of smaller things to address. One of them, I've definitely heard some people say, well, submarines are really slow and that speed limitation is going to limit their effectiveness. Don't really think so, because in the real world, the reason why speed was such an issue is because you had a whole ocean to play with, and surface ships were faster, and on a big ocean, that made submarines not really effective at hunting warships, rather more freighters. But in this game, we have a situation where submarines are on a very, very sort of limited map size-wise, and they're going to have no issues, I think, setting up ambushes and things like that. Another one of the things that they've mentioned that for me is a little bit on the concerning side is submarines apparently share vision with the team. So really, submarines can be attacking a lot of times from stealth. And I'm really not sure how that will be received, shall we say, because I mean, destroyers and their torpedoes are already like, ah, sometimes, right? Well, here's a warship that for most surface ships you will basically never see. And it's gonna like torp you from very close distances even. I definitely have certain amounts of concerns about this as well. One other thing, and this is really small, is like right now the submarines look like they do maneuver up, down, surface, submerge a little bit too quickly, but I'm sure that's only because this is a PvE mode, and if it ever does make it into a PvP mode, they will make their adjustments for that. Alright, so, what are the good things? Because, you know, I've talked about concerns, but there are a few, at least I would say, good indications about things. One of them seems to be the fact that if you take a look at a lot of the footage, you will definitely notice that the air timer is not infinite. The air timer seems to be only for short bursts. Now, of course, all the ships that they're showing are like tier 7 ships, so maybe at tier 10 the submerge time will be longer. That should be one of those balancing variables. But it's good that they're thinking about submarines as being able to submerge for relatively short-ish periods of times and needing to come back up and charge for air, and at least maybe giving the enemy team a chance to spot them. It seems to be what they're going with. And that's a good indication. It means that they are definitely thinking about the balancing aspects of these submarines, not making them ridiculous. Also, if you look at the weapons, the torpedoes aren't nukeable salvos. They're individual torpedoes getting fired like one at a time. This, in theory, should limit the alpha strike capacity of the submarines, so at least we're not going to have like the Navy field scenario where the submarines could unload all of their torpedo tubes all at the same time. And yeah, that wasn't fun, right? Navy field had a situation where the implementation of the submarine was, for me, I would say the beginning of the end of the game. Like when Navy field brought in submarines, the game started to die like right there. Because what they ended up doing with submarines is they turned them into basically anti-battleship weapons, and there was just too much power in terms of the torpedoes. It seems like World of Warships might be a little bit more cautious about that and not giving them this ability, which is a good thing, by the way, but it still raises a question. If the submarine gameplay is, as they say, incredibly planning-oriented, you have to really like set things up, then if a submarine captain goes through all that work, sets up properly, gets into the right position, but then lands one torpedo only, because then the enemy ship, let's say, turns in right away, well then how is the submarine player rewarded? And that becomes another interesting question as well. All in all, these are my initial concerns, thoughts, right, about submarines. What are yours? What kind of concerns or issues or thoughts do you have? And by the way, if they can implement it correctly, and this is really, really important, if they can implement submarines correctly into the game, where it adds something new, but doesn't make current situations worse and maybe even theoretically improves them, then great, I am all for that. But they do have to be very, very careful. Just like they have to be very, very careful with the CV rework as well. And that does it for this video, folks. Leave me your thoughts in the comment section below. Aside from all that, take care, have yourselves a good one, and I will talk to all of you again really, really soon.